Okay, so this is part two of our first topic, and I promise it's going to be a little more interesting and a little shorter. So the last part of what we just got done talking about focused on the fact that criminology is a social science and that we use science to understand human behavior. But the other part of that is that we're not robots doing science. It's human beings studying crime through science, and as human beings, it's important to recognize that we have our own sort of limits and biases. And one of the biggest biases that we have is ideology. Um, and ideology is sort of a framework people have for looking at the world. It's kind of our underlying assumptions about how things are and why things are. They tend to be pretty consistent over time and pretty highly emotional charged. So if you get into a debate with your parents or friends about some current social issue and it gets heated and people are screaming at each other, odds are it hits some sort of ideological nerve. So in American politics, we sort of have three flavors of ideology. You have liberals, conservatives, and radicals. Um, the two I want to talk about in more detail are the conservatives and liberals. So, and what I hope to get across here is sort of what underlies the ideology in a way that sort of helps explain policy perspectives. In other words, what to do about problems depends upon what you think caused those problems. So, conservatives tend to value above everything sort of order, stability, sameness. Conservatives tend to get upset with social change, especially if it happens at a rapid pace. Um, Conservatives tend to defer to authority, as opposed to the people who sort of resist authority or press for individual rights against authority. Conservatives tend to think that people get where they deserve. They sort of end up where they deserve in life based on the choices they make and the effort they put into it. Um, and in that sense, crime is considered an outcome that's the result of poor choices, poor decisions. And that the base of all that is the belief that human beings operate under free will, that we choose our life course. In contrast, liberals tend to value above everything fairness and equal opportunity and individual rights. So liberals are much more open to challenging authority and depressing individual rights against authority. Liberals tend to see sort of where you end up in life as a result of kind of where you start in life and outside forces. So a conservative will say, well, somebody ends up wealthy because they made good choices and they worked hard and they earned money. The liberal would say, well, yeah, most wealthy people start out with advantages stacked in their direction, whether it's wealth to start with through inheritance or family, whether it's rigorous education and all this other stuff. And so liberals tend to focus much more on the forces that help determine human behavior. And a way to think about it is that whereas conservatives focus almost purely on free will, liberals tend to point out those things that constrain free will, right? So you can't simply choose if you live in a really bad neighborhood with a horrible education system. You can't simply decide that you're going to get a better education. You can't just say, well, I'm going to go to a better school so liberals point out those things that constrain choice and free will. And in that sense, they tend to see crime as not a sort of freely made choice, but as the end result of a bunch of different causal forces, uh, whether it's sort of internal biological forces or external neighborhood parenting, those sorts of issues. So they see crime as much more caused in that sense. If you sort of take those starting points and say, well, where does that lead you to in terms of crime policy? Conservatives tend to believe that punishment works. And so it goes back to this belief here that if crime is caused by rational human beings deciding, then if you make the punishment stiff enough, that should deter people who are rational and thinking about consequences from actually engaging in crime. The sort of fallback position then has become that, well, if you can't deter some people, if they don't respond to punishment, the only thing left is to sort of take away their opportunity to engage in crime. And in America, we've largely done that through incarceration, through locking people up. The kind of arch conservative who just passed away a couple of years ago is a fellow, a political scientist named James Q. Wilson. And his argument was that, first of all, that there are no root causes of crime, which is a fairly common conservative argument, that crime is a result of choice, and that even if you say crime may have some root causes, that the government isn't in a very good position to change that. So Wilson would say government can't make bad parents into good parents. And so this idea of policy analysis is what can we do within the framework of what government does well to change crime? And his answer was the more sort of ruthless use of incarceration and arrest. And by and large, we've kind of carried out Wilson. His famous book was written in the mid-'70s, and since that time, we've sort of followed his policy prescription. We've built a ton of prisons. We've locked up millions of people. So we'll talk about what result that's had. So liberals then tend to fall into a couple camps. Liberals, because they see root causes of crime, they tend to want to use social change. So liberals will advocate for poverty reduction, for better education, for the sort of basic social things that might impact crime. And then in dealing with offenders, they tend to support rehabilitation. That in contrast to Wilson, somebody like Elliott Currie, who is pretty far on the liberal spectrum, would say, look, the government programs can help make bad parents good parents. We have evidence that shows that this is true, that we have studies that show that when we target the things that cause crime and we change them, that we can actually have an impact. Radicals are folks who tend to believe that our whole system should be sort of blown up and restarted. Both of these camps, liberals and conservatives, would basically say, the structure of our society is pretty sound. I would rather have it this way. I would rather have it that way. Radicals say the capitalist system itself is flawed in ways that produces crime. Ideology as a hidden agenda, as Walter Miller said. A lot of our programs in criminology get designed more on sort of ideological hunches than good sound theory and evaluation, and both sides are guilty of this. So in the 80s, and I just saw The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, just made a documentary about a boot camp, but we devised these boot camps to mimic the military, and the idea was to make life miserable, yell and scream at kids and later adults, and make them do push-ups and sit-ups and all of that, in the hopes that sort of punitive punishment approach will change them. At best, boot camps have had sort of no effect. The only boot camps that have worked have tended to be ones that had a really strong therapeutic or rehabilitative angle to them. On the other hand, liberals are sort of behind this newer, since the 90s, program called restorative justice, and the belief that if victims and offenders meet together and talk, and the community gets more involved, then we can make crime go away. And again, that sort of program, the evidence would say it has, if any effect, a pretty minor effect on reducing crime. So the issue is you want to be able to recognize your own ideology and the ideology of others. And it's not like it's good or bad. It sort of is what it is. And so you need to recognize what you are, where you are, and to not dismiss the other side, to not dismiss the other ideas, to sort of think about them critically rather than saying, well, that's not going to work. So you sort of add politics to this equation. Politicians from both ideological camps have used crime at differing parts of our history. So Democrat Lyndon Johnson was famous for saying that the war on poverty was a war on crime. His belief that if you reduce poverty, you would have a reduction in crime as well, because he believed those two things were linked together. Since the 70s, the conservatives and the Republican Party have made law and order sort of one of the guiding themes, that they've sort of used street crime as a symbol of all disorder and everything wrong with society in that sense. And so they've advocated for a crackdown on street crime. Um, I would say from about mid 2000s until last year that politics had kind of receded from the issue of crime. That crime, as we'll talk about later, crime's been going down for so long that it wasn't really a salient issue with a lot of Americans. Um, right up until President Trump made that a central issue to his campaign, sort of following the playbook from Nixon and Reagan and the others that sort of thumped on street crime and bringing law and order back to society. Um, the other thing that happened in 2015 was that there was a slight increase in the homicide rate, which politicians used as a way to kind of drum up concern about this issue once again. So politics, ideology, and then the last sort of an ingredient is media, which we'll talk about in a bit. Um, in contrast to like boot camps and restorative justice and other sort of ideological driven programs that we do have programs out there that are based on good theory and sound science. And one we'll talk about when we talk about psychology and crime is multi-systemic theory. And if you look at what they changed to reduce crime, nothing on that list would be like, what? Almost all of it is stuff you go, yeah, that makes sense, right? So how well parents supervise their kids, who you let your kids hang around with, whether you get rewarded for your deviant acts. Those are all things that science supports and that really make common sense when you think about why some kids commit crime. And lo and behold, when you change those sorts of things, crime does go down. So the other sort of link to this in terms of public opinion and what Americans think about crime is the media. And a very simple starting point is to say, you think about how many crime-related TV shows you can name off the top of your head. And in class, I have students do this, and we get into the 20s and 30s in terms of the sheer number of television shows, or movies, or newspapers, or fiction books. I mean, how many fiction books are out there about serial killers right now? And you ask yourself, how many top sellers, how many movies, how many TV shows are out there about biology or psychology or physics? And we get to like Big Bang Theory, Bill Nye the Science Guy, and then the discussion kind of peters out pretty quickly. So because the media saturates us with images of crime and criminal justice, most people come into a course like this or already have sort of a set way of thinking about how crime works and have a theory. I mean, most of us don't have our own pet theory of gravity or relativity, but we do have sort of ideas about crime. And in a sense, it's not surprising, right? Like that's how we get our information about a lot of things. With respect to crime, though, one of the issues is how well the media reflects what's true about crime and criminals in the criminal justice system. Because most of us haven't done time in prison, we don't really know what a prison is like, except for when we see it in movies and television shows. And so that sort of backstage behavior that we don't have direct experience with, we form our opinions based on sources like the media. There are reasons to be skeptical about how well the media, how accurately the media covers crime. One of the things to recognize is that the media is in it for the money, right? These are corporations that exist to make money. They're gonna print stuff and use stuff that generates audiences because they sell that audience to advertisers, and that's how they make their money. And in that sense, one of the sort of old dictums of newspapers is that if it bleeds, it leads. Newspapers are going to cover violent crime more than street or property crime. They're going to cover stranger, random, scary violence more than violence between people who know each other, and so on and so forth. And so at the end of the day, they end up covering the most rare form of crime we have, right? When people think violent crime, we think homicides. When we think homicides, we tend to think of sort of random, stranger violence. And in fact, that's sort of the opposite of reality. Property crime is much more common. Even amongst homicide and other violent crime, people tend to know each other. It tends to be husband and wives, boyfriend and girlfriend, friends that get in arguments, and those sorts of issues. So the fact that media needs to sell leads them to sort of selectively cover certain crimes, certain types of crime. And the need for excitement, also, you think of entertainment media, right? You're going to have a reality show about people who shoplift or people who write bad checks. You're going to cover things that are more exciting to people so that they'll tune in. In that sense, the media does, mostly unintentionally, cause all sorts of distortion. So it directs our attention to violent crime and specifically homicide committed by strangers. The typical crime is theft. The typical violent crime is an assault that doesn't cause any physical damage. A fight, people get in a fight, take a few swings, somebody gets knocked down, but there's no damage really done. Very few times does white collar or corporate crime get covered anywhere in the media, in terms of entertainment media, in terms of news coverage. There's exceptions. You think of the Wolf of Wall Street, Smartest Guy in the Room. There's a few sort of entertainment movies. Every once in a while, it crops up in the newspaper, but nowhere near like we see for street crime. The media tends to show the criminal justice system, especially police, as more effective than they actually are. That you think of every detective show, almost always the police get their guy, right? So the percent of crimes that are cleared by the police approach 100%. In reality, police tend to clear less than 20% of crimes. And the media also is sort of culpable for helping to spread some of our biggest crime myths. So if you think about Halloween candy, why do people check their Halloween candy? Right? Why are parents supposed to really carefully check? You're looking for razor blades in the apples and poison and open wrappers. In the history of our Halloweens, only 2 kids have ever been killed from poisoning, and in both cases, they were poisoned by family members that were trying to make it look like a crazy Halloween stranger guy poisoned the candy. So those are the sorts of issues. And it's the other thing I want you to kind of keep your eyes open for when you consume media. So one of the biggest issues is that and I'm curious. I'm doing this before I'm able to look at what you guys say in the crime quiz. But I'm guessing, based on other classes and the recent coverage, that most of you are going to say crime is worse. And you're not alone. Most Americans think crime is getting worse. And there's a great example of this recently at the Republican National Convention before the elections.
4-day exercise in emphasizing feelings over facts.
People around the country feel the Obama administration has kicked them to the curb.
Our country right now is in a very bad spot. You can feel it.
The vast majority of Americans today do not feel safe.
There's a lot of Americans out there who feel like Democrat politicians have taken them for granted.
The whole economy feels stuck.
What do you mean it feels stuck? The economy is about numbers. Feelings are supposed to be irrelevant. Incidentally, feelings are supposed to be irrelevant is a phrase that's inscribed on every British marriage certificate. and this focus on feelings reached its apex in Donald Trump's acceptance speech, which was light on concrete policy, but heavy on provoking strong emotions.
Decades of progress made in bringing down crime are now being reversed. I know that corruption has reached a level like never, ever before in our country. Poverty and violence at home, war and destruction abroad. 180,000 illegal immigrants with criminal records ordered deported from our country are tonight roaming free to threaten peaceful citizens.
Holy shit! He sounds like he's about to announce the first annual Hunger Games. But look, it is worth noting that since President Obama took office, crime rates, the flow of illegal immigrants over our borders, and claims for unemployment benefits have all declined. And yet, frighteningly, when reporters started pointing that out, it didn't seem to matter. Just watch as Newt Gingrich brushed off any effort to fact-check Trump's claims about the US crime rate.
Violent crime is down. The economy is ticking up.
It is not down in the biggest cities.
Violent crime murder rate is down.
Then how come it's up in Chicago, up in Baltimore, and up in Washington?
There are pockets where certainly we have not tackled
your national
murder
capital, your third biggest city.
But violent crime across the country is down.
The average American, I will bet you this morning, does not think crime is down, does not think they are safer.
But it is. We are safer, and it is down.
No, that's your view. I just told no.
These are the national FBI facts.
But what I said is also what I said is also a fact.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't. It's only a fact that that's a feeling people have. This is a graph of the violent crime rate. It's not a fucking Rorschach test. You can't infer anything you like from it. And sure, you can cherry pick recent upticks in some cities, but the overall trend across the country during the Obama presidency, and indeed for the last 25 years, is down. But Newt wasn't done.
The current view is that liberals have a whole set of statistics which theoretically may be right, but it's not where human beings are.
But what you're saying is, but hold on, Mr. Speaker, because you're saying liberals use these numbers, they use this sort of magic math. This is the FBI statistics. They're not a liberal organization.
No,
they're a crime
what I said is equally true. People feel more threatened.
Yes, they feel it, but the facts don't support it.
As a political candidate, I'll go with how people feel, and I'll let you go with the theoreticians.
He just brought a feeling to a fucking fact fight.
All right, so the point is that a large part of how Americans tend to think about crime is sort of disconnected from what we know. We'll talk about kind of how we know about crime and what the levels are in more detail as the next topic. And this is part of the point for doing the little crime quiz, is to sort of have you think about what you think about crime and why you think that way, and to sort of point out the reality. And so here's the data. I've done this crime quiz now for years. And most of the students, across most of the times, you can see it actually going up here. They think that violent crime has gone up. The reality is, as John Oliver said, since the early 90s, crime has gone down. We're at near historic lows for homicide and at historic lows for other violent crime. This is the sort of violent crime index from survey research. This is from the FBI, from homicide. So all the evidence suggests that we're in the sort of midst or perhaps a sort of bottoming out here of a pretty historic crime drop, and people just don't feel that that's true. This is the question about property crime, and you see sort of the same sort of idea, and here's the reality of property crime is it's been going down for even longer than violent crime. In contrast, every year Gallup poll asks Americans, do you think crime is worse than a year ago? And the top bar is the percent of Americans who feel that that's true. So if you think about it, this is during a stretch here. We had this period prior to 9/11 where it sort of matched that as crime went down, people felt like it was better than a year ago. That changed after the 9/11 attacks, and now people tend to think it's worse every year. Right, during this whole time, right, violent crime's been dropping, but roughly 3/4 of Americans, or 2/3 to 3/4, think it's getting worse. Why is that true? I suspect a good part of it has to do with media coverage and what we watch, and that the media tends to show homicides. There's a great study that showed that during this big drop right here, homicide declined 30-40%, and media coverage of homicide went up during that same period 400%. So with the advent of cable television and 24-hour news channels that have to compete against each other, there's more coverage of homicide. You can also look at a variety of criminal justice issues. The portrayal of police tends to be pretty positive in most, although recently we've had sort of media involvement. We'll talk about this towards the end of class, of people capturing what appears to be police brutality or unnecessary shooting. And so one of the questions I asked you guys, and I've asked other people, is, do you think shootings of police killings have gone up or down? And as with crime, most people think it's getting worse. It's getting more dangerous. Here's the actual data from the FBI that shows that the actual police killings have gone pretty dramatically down. We're to the point now where Police officers have essentially a lower homicide rate than non-police or sort of everybody in public. So the odds of getting killed as a getting killed by a murder as a young adult male are sort of lower for police than for the public generally. So, and we'll talk about that data when we talk about policing. So, I guess the sort of take home from this is that basically there's this tendency to distort, and I hate when people say, "Oh, the media wants us to be like this or wants us to do that." The media sort of is biased in pretty particular ways, and their big bias is that they want an audience, and they will sort of sensationalize things in one way or the other to get an audience. And so it's not that they're making facts up, it's that they're choosing sort of what to cover and how to cover it. And so they tend to choose crimes that are violence and stranger violence and terrorist attacks and those sorts of things, to the point where people feel like they're in this constant crime wave, even when crime is actually declining pretty dramatically. So it becomes important, as sort of Newt Gingrich was talking about there, that if people feel unsafe, if they feel like crime is getting worse, it really, he's right to an extent. It doesn't matter what reality is. It doesn't matter that crime is getting better if people believe it's getting worse. And so the danger is that you enact policies based on some fiction, some feeling, rather than how the world actually is. So in terms of this course, keep an open mind in terms of your own ideology, in terms of sort of what you've seen in media and what we're going to cover. So I think that's pretty much it.